Late at night, the first-class cabin touches down at Miami International Airport after a wild flight from Chicago. Marcus Tate, a black man in a battered leather jacket, stumbles off, bruised, gripping a torn boarding pass. Victor Langston, a smug white businessman in a crisp suit, follows, smirking like he's won, though his eyes betray a flicker of fear. Passengers buzz about a mid-flight scene. What began as a snide insult exploded into a brutal ordeal. Marcus barely survived, unmasking a truth that will shadow Victor forever. What really happened up there? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If you stand for justice against prejudice, hit like and subscribe for more gripping tales like this one. The afternoon sun blazed over Chicago O'Hare International Airport, casting long shadows across the sprawling terminal where travelers hustled through security lines and darted toward gates with the urgency of a city that never slowed down. Marcus Tate, a wiry black man in his mid-30s with a quiet intensity etched into his features, navigated the chaos with a steady stride. His worn leather jacket hung loose over a faded gray t-shirt, paired with dark jeans that bore the faint stains of motor oil from years spent under car hoods. In his left hand, he clutched a first-class boarding pass, the ink crisp against the paper, a small triumph he'd earned after years of grinding as a mechanic turned business owner. This wasn't just a flight to Miami for him. It was a milestone, a rare moment to sit among the elite he'd clawed his way up to join, and he carried that pride in the set of his shoulders as he approached Gate B12. The buzz of the terminal faded into a dull hum as he handed his pass to the gate agent, a young woman with a tight ponytail who flashed him a quick smile before waving him through. He stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool air hitting his face, and for a fleeting second, he let himself imagine sinking into that plush first-class seat, a cold drink in hand, the world below shrinking away. But that peace shattered the moment. Victor Langston entered the scene. Victor, a towering figure in his late 40s, swept into the gate area like he owned it, his tailored charcoal suit hugging his broad frame with the precision of a man who spared no expense on appearances. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and a gold watch gleamed on his wrist, catching the fluorescent light as he dragged a sleek rolling suitcase behind him. A real estate mogul with a reputation for bulldozing anything in his path, Victor thrived on the power his wealth afforded him, and first class wasn't just a perk, it was his birthright. He spotted Marcus ahead in the boarding line, his eyes narrowing as he took in the jacket, the jeans, the sneakers scuffed at the toes. His lips curled into a faint sneer, a reflex honed by years of sizing up anyone who didn't fit his mold of success. As the gate agent called for first-class passengers, Victor pushed past a harried mother juggling two kids, his polished leather shoes clicking against the tile with a rhythm that screamed entitlement. He reached the jet bridge just as Marcus stepped aboard, and his gaze locked onto the back of that leather jacket like a predator marking prey. Inside the cabin, Marcus found his seat, 2A, right by the window, and slid into it with a quiet exhale. The leather cushion molded to his frame, a stark contrast to the hard benches of his auto shop back in Chicago, and he rested his hands on the armrests, letting the moment settle. He'd built his chain of repair shops from a single garage into a thriving business, 15 locations strong, all through sweat and sleepless nights. This seat was his reward, and he wasn't about to let anyone dim that shine. He glanced out, the window at the tarmac, where baggage handlers tossed suitcases onto carts under the late summer heat, their orange vests glinting in the sun. The plane's engines hummed faintly, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor, and for a brief heartbeat, he felt untouchable. Then Victor Langston dropped into the aisle seat beside him, 2B, with a thud that jolted Marcus back to reality. Victor's suitcase clattered into the overhead bin, shoved in with a grunt, and he adjusted his suit jacket before sinking into the chair, his knees brushing the edge of Marcus's space. The air between them thickened instantly, charged with an unspoken friction as Victor's sharp blue eyes flicked over Marcus again, lingering on the frayed cuffs of his sleeves. Slumming it up here? Victor's voice cut through the cabin noise, loud enough to turn a few heads in the rows behind them. His tone dripped with mockery, each word coated in a syrupy condescension that made Marcus's jaw tighten. A woman, in a red blazer 2 rows back, glanced up from her magazine, her brows lifting slightly, while an older man with a silver beard across the aisle pretended not to hear, though his fingers paused on his phone screen. Marcus kept his gaze forward, staring at the seat back in front of him, the safety card tucked neatly into its pocket. He'd dealt with guys like this before, puffed-up suits who thought money gave them the right to judge, and he'd learned, long ago, that silence was his sharpest weapon. But Victor wasn't the type to let silence slide. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, his polished shoe dangling into Marcus's line of sight, and let out a low chuckle that grated, like sandpaper. "Guess they're letting anyone in first class these days," he added, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the jab landed. Marcus shifted in his seat, turning his head just enough to meet Victor's stare. The man's face was all hard lines and arrogance, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as if he'd already won some game Marcus hadn't agreed to play. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for takeoff, casting Victor's features in a harsh glow that made his smugness even more pronounced. Marcus could feel the weight of those words, the assumption that he didn't belong, that his presence here was some kind of glitch in the system. His fingers curled around the armrest, the leather creaking under his grip, but he kept his voice steady when he finally spoke. "I paid for this seat same as you," he said, each syllable clipped and deliberate, his dark eyes holding Victor's, without flinching. It wasn't a challenge, not yet, just a fact laid bare. But Victor's smirk faltered for a split second, a crack in his armor that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The engines roared to life, drowning out the chatter of the cabin as the plane taxied toward the runway, the vibration rattling through Marcus's bones. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, the gold flashing again, and leaned closer, his elbow encroaching on the shared armrest like he was staking a claim. "Sure you did," he muttered, his voice low now, meant just for Marcus, though the venom in it was unmistakable. "Standards are dropping, though. Used to be you could tell who belonged up here." He flicked his eyes over Marcus's outfit, again, lingering on the jacket like it was a personal offense, then turned his head to gaze down the aisle, dismissing Marcus as if he were nothing more than a smudge on his polished world. Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest, a familiar burn he'd tamped down 1,000 times before, but he swallowed it, letting his gaze drift back to the window. The plane lurched forward, picking up speed, and the Chicago skyline blurred into streaks of gray and gold as they lifted off, climbing into the sky. Victor pulled a slim tablet from his briefcase, the screen lighting up with stock charts and emails, and began tapping away with the focus of a man who lived for control. Marcus watched him from the corner of his eye, noting the way his fingers moved with practiced precision, the way he muttered to himself about deals and margins like the rest of the world was just background noise. The cabin settled into a hum of quiet conversations and the clink of glassware as flight attendants started their rounds. But the space between Marcus and Victor crackled with something sharper, something alive. Marcus leaned his head against the window, the cool glass grounding him, and let his mind drift to Miami, to the meeting with a supplier that could push his business even further. He wasn't here to prove anything to this guy, he told himself. But Victor's words lingered, a splinter under his skin, and as the plane leveled out at 35,000 feet, Marcus knew this wasn't over. The guy beside him wasn't just rude, he was a spark waiting for fuel, and Marcus had a sinking feeling the fire was already starting to catch. Outside, the clouds stretched endless and white, a sea of cotton hiding the sprawl of the Midwest. Below, but inside, the air felt tight, like a storm brewing in a bottle. Victor's presence was a weight, a challenge Marcus hadn't asked for, and the hours ahead stretched out like a gauntlet. The flight attendant approached with a cart, her heels clicking softly against the carpet, and offered Marcus a smile that felt like a lifeline in the tension. Victor barely glanced up, but his fingers paused on the tablet, his head tilting just enough to keep Marcus in his peripheral vision. The game had begun, whether Marcus wanted it or not, and as the plane cut through the sky, the first seeds of a showdown took root, quiet but undeniable in the plush confines of first class. The plane sliced through the sky at 35,000 feet, the hum of the engines a steady pulse beneath the chatter of the first-class cabin. But the air between Marcus Tate and Victor Langston crackled with something far less serene. Marcus sat rigid by the window, his knuckles whitening around the armrest as he stared at the endless expanse of clouds, their fluffy edges glowing gold in the fading daylight. He'd hoped ignoring Victor's earlier jab would kill the tension, but the guy was like a dog with a bone, gnawing at Marcus's presence like it was a personal affront. Victor lounged in the aisle seat, his tablet propped on his knee, scrolling through emails with a bored flick of his finger, but his eyes kept darting sideways, sizing Marcus up like a pawn on a chessboard he owned. The cabin lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting sharp shadows across Victor's angular face, and Marcus could feel the weight of that gaze, the unspoken dare to react. How long could this guy keep poking before something snapped? Victor cleared, his throat with a theatrical rasp, loud enough to make the woman in the red blazer 2 rows back glance over her magazine again, her lips pursing like she smelled trouble brewing. "So," he started, his voice slick with a faux curiosity that didn't match the sneer tugging at his mouth. "How'd you snag a seat up here? Lottery win? Charity giveaway?" He leaned closer, his elbow claiming the armrest fully now, his gold cufflink glinting like a taunt. Marcus turned his head slowly, meeting Victor's stare, and saw the challenge there, the assumption that he couldn't possibly belong. The older man with the silver beard across the aisle shifted, his phone forgotten, ears perked for the answer. Marcus took a breath, steadying the heat rising in his chest, and kept his tone even, sharp as a blade. "I own a chain of auto repair shops, 15 locations. Built it from nothing. That's how." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap, and for a split second, Victor's smirk froze, his eyes narrowing as if recalculating his prey. Marcus held his gaze, unflinching, letting the truth sink in. He wasn't some fluke, some raffle winner who'd stumbled into first class. He'd earned this, every inch of it, through years of busted knuckles and late nights, turning a single garage into an empire that spanned Chicago's South Side and beyond. Victor's jaw ticked, a muscle jumping under his skin, but then he barked a laugh, short and harsh, shattering the moment. "Oh, that's rich," he said, his voice dripping with venom now. "Affirmative action handouts, huh? Gotta love those. Government boosts for the less fortunate." He waved a hand, dismissive, like Marcus's success was a cheap trick, not a grind. The woman in the blazer winced, her eyes flicking to Marcus with a mix of pity and unease, while the silver-bearded man coughed, hiding a smirk behind his fist. Marcus's pulse kicked up, a drumbeat in his ears, but he leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, his leather jacket creaking softly. He wasn't about to let this guy bait him into a shouting match 35,000 feet in the air. "Not yet. I didn't get handouts," he said, his voice low, cutting through Victor's bravado like a wire. "I built my life. What did you inherit?" The question hung there, sharp and deliberate, flipping the script. Victor's face flushed, a blotchy red creeping up his neck, and Marcus caught the flicker of something raw in his eyes. Embarrassment, maybe, or rage. Had Marcus struck a nerve? Could this polished suit actually be rattled by a mechanic in a beat-up jacket? Victor opened his mouth, then snapped it shut, his fingers tightening around his tablet until the screen dimmed from inactivity. Before the silence could stretch too thin, a flight attendant approached, her heels clicking against the carpet, pushing a cart stacked with drinks and snacks. She was in her late 20s, blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun, her name tag reading, "Kelly" in bold letters. She stopped at their row, her smile brightening as she looked at Marcus first. "Good afternoon, Mr. Tate," she said, her tone warm, almost familiar, like she'd been briefed on him before takeoff. "Can I get you anything? Water? Something stronger?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the respect in her voice, the way she lingered on his name. He shook his head, offering a small smile back. "Just water, thanks." She nodded, pouring it with a practiced grace, and handed him the glass, her fingers brushing his for a split second. Victor's head snapped up, his brows knitting together as he watched the exchange. Why was she so nice to this guy? What did she know that he didn't? Kelly turned to Victor next, her smile cooling a notch, professional but clipped. "And you, sir?" Victor muttered for a scotch, his eyes still locked on Marcus, who sipped his water and stared out the window again, pretending not to notice the scrutiny. The attendant moved on, her cart rattling down the aisle. But Victor's confusion lingered. a storm cloud gathering behind his glare. "Mr. Tate?" he mimicked under his breath, just loud enough for Marcus to hear, his tone laced with mockery. "What's that about? You bribed the crew or something?" Marcus didn't bite, keeping his focus on the clouds, but the dig stung. Another jab at his right to be here. Victor wasn't done, though. He leaned forward, his voice rising again, carrying across the cabin. "I'm all for people experiencing a little luxury," he said, gesturing at Marcus's jacket with a flick of his wrist. "It's just not everyone's used to it, you know? Makes things feel off." The passengers nearby shifted again, the woman in the blazer burying her face deeper in her magazine, the silver-bearded man tapping his phone like he hadn't heard a word. But Marcus caught the glances, the discomfort rippling through the cabin like a stone dropped in still water. Victor's words weren't just for him, they were a performance, a public shaming meant to mark Marcus as an outsider. How far would this guy go to feel superior? Marcus set his water down, the glass clinking softly against the tray, and turned to face Victor fully, his dark eyes burning with a quiet fire. "Different isn't always a bad thing," he said, his voice steady, deliberate, echoing the calm before a storm. "Maybe you're the one who's out of place here." Victor blinked, leaning back slightly, caught off guard by the pushback. His smirk returned, but it was tighter now, less certain, like a mask slipping. Marcus had landed a blow, not with fists, but with words, exposing the cracks in Victor's polished facade. The guy's ego was a house of cards, and Marcus had just tugged at the bottom. Would Victor let it slide or double down harder? Before he could respond, Kelly reappeared, offering a warm nod to Marcus as she passed, her eyes flicking to Victor with a hint of wariness. Victor's face darkened, his fingers drumming on his tablet, and Marcus knew this wasn't the end. If anything, it was the spark lighting a fuse, and the explosion was coming. Hey viewers, what do you think? Comment. Number 1, if you're cheering Marcus for standing his ground against this jerk, or number 2, if you think Victor's too far gone to learn anything. Drop a like if you're rooting for justice to hit hard, and smash that subscribe button to catch every twist in this wild ride. Marcus had drawn a line, and Victor's pride wouldn't let it stand unanswered. The cabin buzzed with a tension you could taste, a showdown brewing at 35,000 feet. Who'd break first? The man who'd built everything from scratch, or the one who thought wealth made him untouchable? What happens when a guy like Victor gets called out and the whole plane's watching? Stick around, because the next move's about to flip this flight upside down. The cabin hummed with the steady drone of engines as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, slicing through a sky now darkening into twilight, the clouds outside Marcus Tate's window tinged with streaks of purple and orange. Marcus sat stiffly in his seat, the aftertaste of his last exchange with Victor Langston still bitter on his tongue. He'd landed a solid hit, calling out Victor's privilege with a precision that left the businessman's face flushed and his smirk shaky. But the victory felt fragile, like a cracked windshield holding together before the next blow. Marcus rubbed his thumb along the edge of his water glass, the condensation cool against his skin, and tried to focus on the horizon, willing the flight to pass without another spark. But Victor wasn't the type to let a bruise to his ego heal quietly. Marcus could feel it, the way the air shifted when Victor's sharp blue eyes flicked toward him, calculating, waiting for an opening. Victor sat slouched in the aisle seat, his tablet forgotten on his lap, its screen gone dark as he drummed his fingers against the armrest with a restless rhythm. His jaw worked silently, chewing over Marcus's words. "What did you inherit?" The question had burrowed under his skin, a splinter he couldn't dig out, and the sting of it fueled a simmering rage. He'd spent decades building an empire, flipping properties, crushing competitors, and this nobody in a greasy jacket dared to imply it was all handed to him. Victor's lips twitched into a thin, dangerous smile as an idea took root. He needed to flip this, to put Marcus back in his place, and he knew exactly how. His hand slipped into his suit pocket, fingers closing around a crisp $50 bill, the paper smooth against his palm. He glanced around the cabin, clocking the passengers nearby. The woman in the red blazer dozing with her magazine splayed across her chest, the silver-bearded man engrossed in a podcast, earbuds dangling. No one was watching too closely. Perfect. Marcus felt the weight of the flight dragging on, the minutes stretching into an eternity as Victor's presence loomed beside him. He needed a break, a moment to breathe away from the guy's suffocating arrogance. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a soft click, the sound barely audible over the engines, and stood, stretching his legs as he edged past Victor toward the restroom at the front of the cabin. Victor didn't look up, his head tilted down as if lost in thought. But the second Marcus's back was turned, his hand moved. Quick as a snake, he leaned over, unzipped Marcus's small duffel bag tucked under the seat ahead, and slipped the $50 inside, nestling it between a spare shirt and a notebook. He zipped it shut, smooth and silent, then straightened up, his smirk returning full force as he reclined like nothing had happened. Marcus disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from the galley, oblivious to the trap being set. When Marcus returned, sliding back into his window seat with a quiet grunt, Victor was ready. He waited a beat, letting Marcus settle, then raised his voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the cabin's low murmur. "Excuse me," he called, waving a hand toward Kelly, the flight attendant, who was stacking empty cups on her cart, a few rows back. She turned, her smile faltering as she caught the edge in his tone, and hurried over, her heels clicking faster now. "Yes, sir?" she asked, stopping beside Victor, her eyes flicking briefly to Marcus with a flicker of concern. Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that still carried, ensuring the nearby passengers could hear every word. "I think we've got a problem here. This guy," he jerked his thumb toward Marcus, "just stole $50 from my wallet while I was distracted." Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes widening as the accusation hit him like a slap. "What?" he said, his voice low but firm, disbelief threading through it. Victor pressed on, his face a mask of righteous indignation, though his eyes gleamed with something darker. "I saw him fiddling with his bag right after I checked my pocket. Money's gone. You do the math." The woman in the red blazer stirred, blinking awake, her gaze darting between the two men, while the silver-bearded man pulled out an earbud, his brow furrowing. Kelly hesitated, her hands hovering over the cart, clearly torn. She'd seen Marcus's calm demeanor earlier, felt his quiet dignity, but Victor's confidence, his polished suit, and the authority in his voice carried a weight she couldn't ignore. "Sir, that's a serious claim," she said, her tone cautious, glancing at Marcus. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Victor snapped, crossing his arms, his gold watch catching the light again. "I want his bag checked. Now." Marcus leaned forward, his pulse racing, anger boiling up as he locked eyes with Victor. "That's a lie," he said, his voice rising just enough to draw more stares. "I didn't touch your damn wallet." But Victor just shrugged, playing it cool, his smirk barely hidden. "Prove it," he said, nodding toward the duffel. Kelly bit her lip, her hands trembling, slightly as she looked at Marcus, apologetic but cornered. "Mr. Tate, I'm sorry, but I have to check. It's protocol." Marcus clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, but he nodded, shoving the bag toward her with a jerky motion. "Go ahead. You won't find anything." Kelly knelt, unzipping the duffel with careful fingers, and rummaged through it, her movement slow, like she was hoping to come up empty. But then her hand stilled and she pulled out the $50 bill, holding it up with a wince. The cabin went quiet, the air thick with judgment as eyes turned on Marcus. The woman in the blazer gasped softly, clutching her magazine tighter, while the silver-bearded man muttered, "Typical," under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Victor leaned back, his smirk breaking into a full grin now, triumphant. "Told you," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Guess some people can't help themselves." Marcus stared at the bill, his mind racing, pieces clicking together too late. He hadn't taken it. He'd never even seen Victor's wallet. This was a setup, and he'd walked right into it. "Hold on," Marcus said, standing halfway, his voice sharp now, cutting through the murmurs. "He planted that. I didn't touch a thing." But the damage was done. The passengers' faces hardened, their whispers growing louder, a chorus of doubt and disdain. Kelly stood, clutching the bill, her eyes darting between Marcus and Victor. I'll have to report this, she said, her voice small, apologetic. Mr. Tate, I need your ID. Security will handle it when we land. Marcus's stomach dropped, a cold sweat prickling his skin as he fished his wallet from his pocket, handing over his driver's license with a hand that didn't shake, though inside he was raging. Victor watched, his grin widening, savoring the moment as Kelly took the ID and scribbled something on a notepad, her pen scratching like a death knell. That's ridiculous, Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with fury. You're believing him over me because of what? His suit? Kelly flinched, avoiding his gaze, and stepped back, clutching the ID like it burned her. It's not my call, she mumbled, retreating down the aisle toward the galley, leaving Marcus exposed under the weight of a dozen accusing stares. Victor chuckled, low and smug, adjusting his cufflinks with a flourish. Should have stayed in coach, he muttered, just for Marcus, his voice dripping with venom. This is what happens when you reach too high. The woman in the blazer shook her head, whispering to her seatmate, while the silver-bearded man slipped his earbud back in, dismissing Marcus entirely. Marcus sank back into his seat, his breath shallow, his mind spinning. He'd won a round, earlier, shut Victor down with a few sharp words, but now that victory was ash. The 50 in his bag, the passengers' glares, the crew's suspicion, it all piled on like bricks, crushing the pride he'd carried onto this flight. He stared at the bill still clutched in Kelly's hand as she disappeared behind the curtain, knowing it wasn't just about money. It was about power, about Victor needing to prove Marcus didn't belong, and he'd played it perfectly. The plane jolted slightly, a pocket of turbulence rattling the overhead bins, and Marcus gripped the armrest, his knuckles whitening again. He wasn't a thief, but they'd made him one, and landing in Miami was starting to feel like walking into a trap. Victor had flipped the script, and Marcus was the one bleeding for it now. The first-class cabin at 35,000 feet felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with suspicion as the plane carved its path through the night sky toward Miami. Marcus Tate sat pinned to his window seat, his chest tight, the weight of Victor Langston's lie pressing down on him like a slab of concrete. The $50 bill Kelly had pulled from his duffel still dangled in her hand as she vanished behind the galley curtain, leaving Marcus alone under a spotlight of glares and whispers. His driver's license was gone, tucked into her notepad, and with it went the last shred of dignity he'd carried onto this flight. He stared at the clouds outside, their edges now swallowed by darkness, a faint shimmer of moonlight bouncing off their peaks, but the view offered no escape from the storm brewing inside the cabin. Victor lounged beside him, his victory etched into the lazy sprawl of his legs, his polished shoe tapping a slow, taunting beat against the carpet. Word of the theft spread fast, rippling through the rows like wildfire through dry grass. The woman in the red blazer, now fully awake, leaned across the aisle to her seatmate, a balding man in a golf shirt, her voice a hushed buzz of indignation. "Can you believe it? Right in first class," she said, her eyes cutting to Marcus, with a mix of scorn and fear, clutching her purse tighter as if he might lunge for it next. The silver-bearded man across from them yanked out his earbud, his podcast forgotten, and shot Marcus a look that could have curdled milk, his lips curling as he muttered, "Typical," loud enough to sting. Marcus caught the word, felt it lodge in his gut like a shard of glass, but he kept his face still, his jaw locked, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. Victor soaked it in, his smirk widening as he leaned back, arms crossed over his chest, his gold watch glinting like a trophy. He tilted his head toward the couple in the row ahead, a pair of retirees in matching pastel polos who'd been sipping wine before the drama unfolded. "You folks see that?" he said, his voice smooth, inviting them into his triumph. "Guess you never know who you're sitting with these days." The woman turned, her silver hair catching the light, and offered Victor a tight, approving nod, her eyes sliding past Marcus like he was invisible. Her husband chuckled, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Good thing you caught him," he said, his tone dripping with camaraderie. Victor grinned, basking in their approval, and shot Marcus a sidelong glance, his eyes gleaming with a predator's glee. Marcus shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under him, his hands balling into fists on his lap. He wanted to stand, to shout that it was a setup, that Victor had planted the cash. But the words stuck in his throat, choked by the realization that no one here would believe him. The cabin had turned, the passengers' faces a gallery of judgment, their whispers weaving a narrative he couldn't unwrite. He caught a flicker of movement as a teenage girl 3 rows back peeked over her seat, her phone angled subtly toward him, filming or snapping a picture, her lips pursed in a smirk. The guy next to her, a lanky kid in a hoodie, leaned over and whispered something that made her giggle, their eyes darting to Marcus like he was the evening's entertainment. Heat in his chest flared, a mix of rage and shame, but he forced it down, staring at the tray table in front of him, its surface scratched and dull. Kelly reappeared from the galley, her steps slower now, her face a mask of discomfort as she approached their row. She held Marcus's ID between her fingers, her notepad tucked under her arm, and stopped just short of Victor, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "Mr. Tate," she said, her voice clipped, professional, a far cry from the warmth she'd shown earlier. "I've reported this to the captain. Security will meet us when we land. Until then, please, behave." The word landed like a slap, sharp and cold, and Marcus's head jerked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "Behave?" he repeated, his voice low, edged with disbelief. "You think I did this?" Kelly's lips pressed into a thin line, her cheeks flushing, but she didn't answer, just handed him his ID with a trembling hand and stepped back, retreating to her cart like she couldn't get away fast enough. Victor chuckled, a deep, throaty sound that rolled over Marcus like gravel. "Smart advice," he said, loud enough for Kelly to hear as she moved down the aisle. "Wouldn't want any more trouble, right?" He stretched his arms, his suit, jacket pulling tight across his shoulders, and glanced around the cabin, catching the approving nods of the retirees and the balding man in the golf shirt. The woman in the red blazer whispered something to her seatmate again, her eyes narrowing, as she studied Marcus, and he felt the weight of it all. The way they'd branded him without a shred of proof. He slid his ID into his pocket, his fingers brushing the worn leather of his wallet, and tried to speak, to claw back some ground. "You're all buying this because he says so?" he asked, his voice rising, aimed at no one and everyone. "You didn't see a damn thing," the silver-bearded man snorted, shaking his head like Marcus was a child throwing a tantrum. "We saw the money," he said, his tone final, popping his earbud back in as if the matter was settled. The woman in the blazer clutched her purse, tighter, her knuckles whitening, and muttered, "Some people," under her breath, the words a dagger aimed straight at Marcus's back. The teenage girl's phone flashed again, the faint click of a photo slicing through the hum, and Marcus's stomach twisted, a sickening lurch as he realized this wasn't just humiliation. It was a public execution. He turned to Victor, his eyes burning. But the guy just grinned, his teeth flashing white in the dim light, and leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only for Marcus. "Told you, buddy. Should have stayed where you belong." Marcus's hands trembled, the urge to swing at that smug face surging through him. But he gripped the armrest instead, the leather groaning under his fingers. He wasn't a thief, wasn't a criminal, but they'd painted him as one, and the brushstrokes were all Victor's. The cabin tilted slightly as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, the overhead bins rattling, and a few passengers gasped, clutching their seats. Marcus barely noticed, his world narrowing to the man beside him, the one who'd turned a flight into a battlefield and won without breaking a sweat. Kelly returned with her cart, offering drinks to the retirees up front, her back stiff as she avoided their row entirely, refusing Marcus even a glass of water now. The message was clear. He was poison, untouchable, a pariah in a space he'd earned. The retirees clinked their wine glasses, their laughter floating back to Marcus like salt in a wound, and Victor joined in, his deep chuckle blending with theirs, a symphony of triumph. "Nice folks," he said, loud enough for Marcus to hear, then turned to the balding man in the golf shirt, striking up a conversation about real estate deals, his voice smooth and commanding, pulling the cabin deeper into his orbit. Marcus sat alone, the window his only ally, the cold glass pressing against his shoulder as he stared into the void outside. The passengers' glares, the whispers, the way Kelly wouldn't meet his eyes, it all piled on, a weight he couldn't shake. He'd tried to explain, to fight back, but it was like shouting into a hurricane, his voice drowned by the roar of their judgment. The turbulence hit again, harder this time, the plane jolting sharply, and a tray clattered somewhere in the back, drawing a few nervous laughs. Marcus gripped the armrest tighter, his knuckles aching, and glanced at Victor, who didn't flinch, just kept talking, his hands gesturing grandly like he owned the sky itself. Marcus's mind raced, searching for a way out, a plan to turn this around. But the walls were closing in, the cabin a cage he couldn't escape. He wasn't just isolated, he was erased, stripped of the pride he'd carried aboard. And Victor sat there, smug and untouchable, savoring every second of it. The flight stretched on, the hours to Miami a gauntlet of silent accusations, and Marcus knew this wasn't the end. Victor had drawn blood, and the taste of it only made him hungrier. The first-class cabin vibrated with the steady hum of engines cutting through the night, the sky outside Marcus Tate's window, a void of black pierced by the occasional flicker of stars. At 35,000 feet, the air felt stale, heavy, with the stench of Victor Langston's victory, as Marcus sat pinned under the weight of a dozen accusing stares. His hands rested on his lap, fingers twitching with the urge to fight back. But the isolation had sunk deep, a cold ache in his bones. The passengers' whispers buzzed like flies around him, the woman in the red blazer still clutching her purse, the silver-bearded man shaking his head every time he glanced over, and Victor sprawled in the aisle seat, his smug laughter a blade twisting in Marcus's gut. The turbulence from earlier had settled, but the storm inside the cabin raged on, and Marcus felt like a man drowning with no shore in sight. Victor leaned forward, his voice carrying as he regaled the retirees in the row ahead with a story about a shady tenant he'd evicted last month, his hands gesturing grandly, his gold watch flashing under the cabin lights. "You give some people an inch, they take a mile," he said, his eyes sliding to Marcus with a pointed smirk, loud enough to draw a chuckle from the balding man in the golf shirt across the aisle. Marcus stared at the tray table, its scratches blurring as he fought the heat rising in his throat. He'd been branded a thief, a pariah, all because Victor had slipped $50 into his bag and spun a lie no one questioned. Kelly, the flight attendant, hadn't returned since warning him to behave, her absence a silent confirmation that the crew had turned too. Marcus was alone, cornered, until a shadow fell across his row, a new figure stepping into the fray. Jamal, a young black flight attendant in his early 20s, moved down the aisle with a cart stacked with snacks, his uniform crisp, his dreadlocks tied back in a neat bun. His dark eyes flicked toward Marcus as he approached, a quick, assessing glance that lingered longer than Kelly's had. He stopped near the galley, just out of Victor's line of sight, and bent to adjust something on the cart. His movements, slow, deliberate. Marcus barely noticed, lost in the spiral of his own thoughts, until he caught the faint sound of Victor's voice drifting from the galley curtain, low and boastful. "Taught him a lesson he won't forget," Victor muttered, his tone dripping with glee, likely thinking no one else could hear. But Jamal did. His head tilted slightly, his jaw tightening as he straightened up, and Marcus saw it, a spark of recognition in the younger man's face, a flicker of something that wasn't disdain. Jamal pushed the cart closer, stopping at Marcus's row, and leaned down under the pretense of offering a bag of pretzels. "Hey," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine's hum, his eyes locked on Marcus's. "I saw what he did, back there, with the money. I know you didn't take it." Marcus blinked, his breath catching as the words sank in, a lifeline tossed into the chaos. He glanced at Victor, who was still chatting up the retirees, oblivious, then back at Jamal, searching his face for a trick, but there was none, just a quiet resolve in the younger man's gaze, a solidarity Marcus hadn't expected. "You serious?" Marcus murmured, keeping his voice low, his heart kicking up with a faint pulse of hope. Jamal nodded, sliding the pretzels onto Marcus's tray with a casual flick of his wrist. "Yeah, I've got your back. I'll tell the captain when we land." Marcus exhaled, a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and felt a surge of relief wash over him, sharp and sudden. Someone believed him. Someone saw through Victor's game. He leaned back, the leather seat creaking under him, and let the moment settle, the weight on his chest lifting just enough to breathe. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice rough but steady, meeting Jamal's eyes with a nod. "Means a lot." Jamal offered a small, tight smile, a flicker of warmth in the cold cabin, and straightened up, pushing the cart forward. "We'll sort it out," he added, his whisper fading as he moved to the next row, leaving Marcus with a lifeline he hadn't dared hope for. Marcus picked up the pretzels, tearing the bag open with a quiet rip, and popped one into his mouth, the salt grounding him as his mind raced. He glanced at Victor, who was still yammering about property values, his hands waving like he was conducting an orchestra of his own ego. The guy had no idea Jamal had overheard, no clue that Marcus might have a way out. For the first time since Victor's lie took root, Marcus felt a flicker of control, a chance to flip this nightmare back on the man who'd started it. He chewed slowly, his eyes drifting to the window, the stars outside winking like tiny promises. In the dark, Jamal knew the truth and he was willing to fight for it. Maybe this flight wasn't over for Marcus yet. But then Victor turned, his sharp blue eyes catching Marcus with the pretzels, and his grin faltered, just for a heartbeat. He'd seen Jamal linger, seen the exchange, and though he couldn't have heard the whispers, something in his gut twitched, a predator sensing a shift in the wind. He tilted his head, studying Marcus with a new intensity, his fingers pausing mid-gesture as the retirees waited for his next word. Marcus met his stare, unflinching, and popped another pretzel into his mouth, chewing deliberately, letting Victor wonder. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the crew adjusting them for the late hour, and the tension between the two men thickened, a silent standoff at 35,000 feet. Jamal moved further down the aisle, his cart rattling softly, and Marcus watched him go, clinging to the hope he'd offered. Victor's grin returned, tighter now, less certain, and he leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, his watch glinting again. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The challenge was in his eyes, a promise that he wasn't done. Marcus felt it, the way the air shifted, the way Victor's smugness hardened into something sharper. Jamal might be an ally, but Victor wasn't the type to let a threat slide, and Marcus knew the guy's next move would be brutal. The plane sailed on, the night stretching endless outside, and Marcus braced himself, the glimmer of hope a fragile flame in a wind that was starting to howl. Hey viewers, what's your take? Comment number 1 if you think Jamal's the hero Marcus needs right now, or number 2 if you're worried Victor's already plotting something worse. Hit that like button if you're rooting for Marcus to turn this around, and subscribe to see how this battle plays out in the sky. Marcus had a spark of hope, but Victor's not backing down. What happens when a guy with power smells a challenge he can't ignore? Can Jamal really stand up to a man who's used to winning every fight? Buckle up, because the next twist is about to take this flight to a whole new level. The first-class cabin hummed through the night, the plane slicing across the sky at 35,000 feet. A cocoon of dim lights and restless murmurs as Miami loomed closer on the horizon. Marcus Tate sat by the window, the faint glow of stars outside casting slivers of silver across his face, his hands steady now, clutching the torn pretzel bag Jamal had slipped him. That small act, that whispered promise of "I've got your back," had lit a spark in him. A fragile hope flickering against the darkness of Victor Langston's lie. He chewed the last pretzel, the salt sharp on his tongue, and let his shoulders relax for the first time since the $50 bill turned the cabin against him. Jamal's words echoed in his mind, a lifeline he clung to, and he glanced down the aisle, watching the young flight attendant move with quiet purpose, his cart rattling softly against the carpet. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe he could still walk off this plane with his head high. Victor lounged in the aisle seat, his sharp blue eyes narrowed, tracking Jamal's every step like a hawk circling prey. The retirees up front had drifted into a wine-soaked doze, their glasses empty on their trays, and the balding man in the golf shirt was engrossed in a tablet game, leaving Victor's audience thinned. But he didn't need their applause now. He'd seen Jamal linger at Marcus's row, caught the subtle exchange, and though he hadn't heard the whispers, his gut screamed trouble. Marcus's defiance, the way he'd met Victor's stare with that slow chew of a pretzel, had flipped a switch. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about crushing, and Victor wasn't about to let some kid in a uniform unravel his game. He adjusted his suit jacket, the fabric whispering against the leather seat, and waited, his fingers tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm on the armrest. Jamal reached the galley, parking his cart near the curtain, and bent to restock napkins, back to the cabin. Victor saw his chance. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a soft click, the sound swallowed by the engines, and stood, smoothing his tie as he strode toward the galley with the casual arrogance of a man who owned every room he entered. Marcus caught the movement from the corner of his eye, his stomach tightening as Victor disappeared behind the curtain, but he brushed it off. Probably just grabbing a drink, he told himself, though the unease gnawed at him, a quiet warning he couldn't shake. Inside the galley, Victor found Jamal alone, the narrow space cramped with carts and coffee pots, the hum of the plane louder here, muffling their voices from the cabin. Jamal straightened as Victor stepped in, his hands pausing on a stack of cups, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone polite but edged with caution, sensing the weight of Victor's presence. Victor didn't waste time. He reached into his suit pocket, pulling out a sleek business card, the embossed letters of Langston Properties glinting under the galley's harsh light, and held it up between two fingers like a weapon. "You know who I am?" he said, his voice low, a hiss that cut through the engine noise. Jamal's brow furrowed, his gaze flicking to the card, then back to Victor's face, but he didn't answer. Victor stepped closer, his bulk filling the space, and flashed a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a major investor in this airline, boardroom level. You want a career here, kid?" Jamal froze, his breath catching as the words landed heavy and cold. Victor's smile tightened, his voice dropping lower, a venomous whisper. "You saw nothing back there. Nothing with the money, nothing with him. You open your mouth to the captain and I'll make sure you're slinging burgers by next week, understand?" He flicked the card onto the counter, letting it skid toward Jamal, who stared at it, his hands clenching at his sides. The weight of Victor's power hung between them, a noose tightening around Jamal's resolve, and Marcus, oblivious in his seat, had no idea his lifeline was fraying. Jamal's jaw worked, his eyes darting to the curtain, then back to Victor, who stood there, unyielding, his watch glinting like a silent threat. After a long, suffocating beat, Jamal nodded once, up on his eye, jerky motion, his shoulders slumping as he turned away, shoving the card into his pocket with a trembling hand. Victor smirked, satisfied, and strode back to his seat, his shoes clicking against the galley floor, then the carpet, a triumphant rhythm that echoed in Marcus's ears as he settled back into 2B. Marcus glanced at him, catching the flicker of smugness in Victor's eyes, and felt that unease sharpen into a blade. Something was wrong, but he couldn't place it. Not yet. Minutes later, Jamal emerged from the galley, his cart rattling louder now, his face a mask of defeat as he approached Marcus's row. He stopped, his eyes downcast, avoiding Marcus's gaze, and leaned in just enough to whisper, "They're not listening. I tried. I'm sorry." His voice cracked, barely audible, and he straightened up fast, pushing the cart away before Marcus could respond, disappearing down the aisle like a ghost. Marcus's stomach dropped, a sickening lurch, as Jamal's words sank in, the hope he'd clung to shattering like glass under a boot. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice low, his eyes following Jamal's retreat. But the younger man didn't look back, his shoulders hunched as he served the next row. Marcus turned to Victor, who met his stare with a lazy grin, his fingers laced behind his head, the picture of a man who just won a war. "Problem?" Victor asked, his tone light, mocking, and Marcus's blood ran hot, realization crashing over him like a wave. Victor had gotten to Jamal, flipped him somehow, and now Marcus was back to square one, worse off than before. The cabin lights flickered briefly, a glitch in the system, and the passengers stirred. But Marcus barely noticed, his world narrowing to the man beside him. Victor's influence had flipped the crew, and it showed. Kelly returned minutes later, her cart loaded with blankets, her eyes cold as she passed Marcus without a glance, offering a smile to Victor instead. "Anything else for you, sir?" she asked, her voice syrupy, and Victor waved her off with a chuckle. Just keep an eye on things. She nodded, her gaze sliding past Marcus like he was a stain on the carpet, and moved on, leaving him with nothing, not even the courtesy of a blanket in the chilly cabin. Another attendant, a wiry man with a buzz cut, followed, his eyes lingering on Marcus with a hard, suspicious squint, before he muttered something to Kelly up ahead, their heads bending together in quiet conference. Marcus caught the shift. The way they treated him like a criminal now, their deference to Victor a silent slap. "Money talks louder than your kind," Victor said, his voice a whisper meant just for Marcus, his grin splitting wide as he leaned closer, his breath hot against the air between them. Marcus's hands balled into fists, his nails digging into his palms, the leather of his jacket creaking as he fought the urge to swing. He'd had a shot, a real shot with Jamal, and Victor had snuffed it out with a flick of his wrist. A business card, a threat. The cabin spun around him, the passengers' glares sharper now, the whispers louder, a chorus of disdain that drowned out his protests. The retirees snored softly. The woman in the red blazer flipped through her magazine with a huff. And the teenage girl 3 rows back snapped another photo, her flash a brief stab in the dark. Marcus sank deeper into his seat, the window cold against his shoulder, the stars outside mocking him with their distance. He'd tasted hope, felt it bloom when Jamal promised to fight, but now it was gone, stolen by Victor's power, and the flight stretched on, a prison he couldn't escape. Victor gloated beside him, his laughter a low rumble that shook Marcus to his core, and the realization hit hard. This wasn't just a setback, it was a burial. The crew wouldn't listen, the passengers wouldn't care, and Marcus was alone. Again, the spark Jamal had lit extinguished under the weight of Victor's world. The plane jolted slightly, a faint turbulence rattling the overhead bins, and Marcus gripped the armrest, his knuckles aching, knowing the worst was still coming. The first-class cabin sailed through the night at 35,000 feet, the stars outside Marcus Tate's window glinting like shards of ice against the endless black. But inside, the air burned with a tension that threatened to ignite. Marcus sat rigid, his shoulder pressed against the cold glass, his hands clenched into fists on his lap, the leather of his jacket creaking with every shallow breath. Jamal's betrayal had gutted him, the young flight attendant's whispered retreat still ringing in his ears, leaving him stranded in a sea of hostile faces. Victor Langston's power had flipped the crew, turned hope to ash, and now Marcus felt the weight of it all. A man cornered with nowhere to run. The cabin lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting Victor's sharp features in a harsh glow as he sprawled in the aisle seat, his smugness a living thing, coiling around Marcus like smoke. Victor adjusted his suit jacket, his gold watch catching the light with a flash that stung Marcus's eyes, and let out a low chuckle, a sound that rumbled through the space between them. He'd silenced Jamal, crushed Marcus's spark, and the taste of it fueled him, his arrogance swelling with every passing minute. The retirees up front snored softly, their wine glasses tipped over on their trays, and the woman in the red blazer flipped through her magazine with a huff, her purse still clutched tight. The silver-bearded man across the aisle scrolled his phone, his earbuds back in, oblivious now, while the teenage girl 3 rows back dozed, her phone dark on her lap. The cabin had settled into a restless quiet, but Victor wasn't done. He leaned forward, grabbing a steaming coffee from Kelly's cart as she passed, her eyes avoiding Marcus entirely, and held it with a casual grip, the steam curling up in thin wisps. Marcus stared at the tray table, its scratches a map of his unraveling pride, and tried to block out Victor's presence, to focus on Miami, on walking away from this nightmare. But Victor had other plans. He shifted in his seat, his elbow brushing Marcus's arm, and then, with a flick of his wrist, he accidentally tipped the coffee, the scalding liquid splashing across Marcus's lap. Marcus gasped, a sharp hiss escaping his lips as the heat seared through his jeans, soaking his thighs and burning his skin. He jerked upright, his hands flying to wipe it off, the sting radiating up his legs as he bit back a curse. Victor's eyes widened in mock surprise, his mouth twitching into a grin. "Oops, clumsy me," he said, his voice loud enough to draw a few heads. the balding man in the golf shirt glancing back with a nervous laugh. Marcus glared at him, his breath ragged, the pain sharpening his fury as he swiped at the soaked fabric, the coffee dripping onto the carpet below. "You did that on purpose," he growled, his voice low, trembling with a rage he could barely leash. Victor set the empty cup on his tray, leaning closer, his grin splitting wide as he dropped his voice to a whisper, meant just for Marcus. "Stay in your lane, boy," he said, the word dripping with venom, a slur wrapped in a taunt that hit Marcus like a punch. The cabin spun, the passengers' laughter fading into a dull roar in his ears, and Marcus's hands shook, the urge to swing surging through him. But he held back, his nails digging into his palms, knowing a move now would only bury him deeper. Victor watched him, his eyes gleaming, daring him to react, savoring the restraint like it was another win. The retirees stirred, the woman muttering, something about spills, but no one intervened, their chuckles a soft echo of Victor's control. The woman in the red blazer peeked over her magazine, her lips pursed, then looked away, pretending not to see. Marcus wiped his arm, the skin red and raw where the coffee had splashed, and shot Victor a look that could have melted steel. "You're a coward," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. Victor's grin faltered, just for a heartbeat, but he recovered fast, leaning back with a shrug. "Call it what you want," he muttered, his tone light, dismissive, as if Marcus's pain was a footnote in his game. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, a calm drawl that broke the moment. "Folks, we're hitting some turbulence ahead. Please stay seated and keep your belts fastened." The plane jolted almost on cue, a sharp dip that rattled the overhead bins and sent a few gasps through the cabin. Victor seized the chaos, his hand darting out as the plane rocked, grabbing Marcus's tray table and shoving it hard into his lap. The edge slammed into Marcus's thighs, the coffee-soaked jeans pressing deeper into his burns, and he grunted, pain flaring white-hot as the tray tipped, spilling his empty pretzel bag onto the floor. Victor laughed, a deep, throaty sound that drowned out the turbulence, and leaned closer, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "Better get used to it," he sneered, his voice a growl, "because this is just the start." Marcus shoved the tray back, his hands trembling with the effort to stay calm, the burns throbbing as he gripped the armrest, the leather slick under his fingers. The plane steadied, the turbulence easing, but the cabin felt tighter, the walls closing in as Victor's threat hung between them. The balding man chuckled again, a nervous hiccup, and glanced at Victor with a nod, like he'd just watched a good show. The woman in the red blazer flipped a page, her fingers twitching, while the silver-bearded man tapped his phone, oblivious or uncaring. Marcus's chest heaved, his breath shallow, the pain in his legs a constant pulse, but he kept, his eyes forward, refusing to give Victor the satisfaction of a flinch. Victor leaned back, crossing his legs, his polished shoe dangling into Marcus's space again, a silent claim on the territory he'd won. He sipped the last dregs of his coffee, the cup rattling slightly as he set it down, and shot Marcus a sidelong glance, his smirk a permanent fixture now. The crew stayed clear, Kelly bustling at the front with the wiry attendant, their heads bent together, their eyes darting back to Marcus with a suspicion that felt like chains. The teenage girl stirred, her phone lighting up as she yawned, but she didn't look over, the earlier thrill of snapping photos lost to the late hour. Marcus sat there, soaked and stinging, his pride battered, his hopes snuffed out, and Victor's words echoed in his skull, a promise of more to come. The plane sailed on, the night stretching endless outside, the stars cold and distant, and Marcus felt the shift, the way Victor's game had turned physical, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. His burns ached, a raw reminder of the man beside him, and he knew this wasn't just about humiliation anymore. Victor was escalating, pushing harder, and Marcus's restraint was a thread fraying fast. The cabin settled back into its uneasy quiet, the turbulence gone, but the storm between them roared louder, a clash of wills at 35,000 feet. Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans, the damp fabric sticking to his skin, and braced himself, the pain a fuel he couldn't ignore. Victor had drawn blood, literal and figurative, and Marcus wasn't sure how much longer he could hold back before the fire inside him erupted. The first-class cabin thrummed with the steady pulse of engines cutting through the night, the plane soaring at 35,000 feet. A fragile bubble of light against the vast dark outside Marcus Tate's window. His jeans clung to his thighs, soaked with cooling coffee, the burns beneath throbbing with every heartbeat, a raw sting that fueled the fire roaring in his chest. Victor Langston's latest attack, the tray shoved into his lap during turbulence, still echoed in the ache of his legs, and the man's sneering words, "Better get used to it," looped in Marcus's skull, a taunt he couldn't shake. The cabin lights buzzed overhead, casting Victor's smug face in a sickly glow as he lounged in the aisle seat, his polished shoe tapping a lazy rhythm, his gold watch glinting like a crown he'd stolen. Marcus gripped the armrest, his knuckles whitening, the leather creaking under his fingers, his restraint a thread stretched to snapping. Victor leaned back, his arms crossed, his grin wide and sharp, savoring the silence he'd forced on Marcus, the way the cabin had bent to his will. The retirees up front snored, their trays a mess of tipped glasses, while the woman in the red blazer flipped her magazine with a bored sigh, her purse still clutched tight. The silver-bearded man scrolled his phone, earbuds in, and the teenage girl 3 rows back dozed, her phone dark on her lap. The balding man in the golf shirt glanced back, catching Victor's eye with a nod, a silent cheer for the show. Marcus felt their indifference, their complicity, a weight that crushed him deeper into his seat. But Victor wasn't done pushing. He shifted, his elbow brushing Marcus's arm again, and then, with a casual flick, he reached over, nudging Marcus's tray table back into his lap, the edge digging into his burns with a fresh jolt of pain. Marcus sucked in a breath, his vision blurring red as the tray pressed harder, Victor's hand lingering, his smirk daring him to snap. "What's wrong?" Victor muttered, his voice a low growl, loud enough for the balding man to hear, who chuckled softly, egging him on. "Can't handle a little nudge?" The tray rocked as Victor pushed again, a deliberate shove that sent a spike of agony through Marcus's thighs, the coffee-soaked fabric grinding into his skin. Something broke inside him, a dam bursting under the flood of humiliation, pain, and rage. He'd endured the insults, the framing, the betrayal, but this physical taunting was a line too far. His hands shot up, fast as a whip, and grabbed Victor's wrist mid-shove, twisting it hard, the bones grinding under his grip. Victor yelped, a sharp, startled cry that sliced through the cabin's hum, his eyes widening as Marcus's strength locked him in place. "Touch me again," Marcus growled, his voice a low, feral snarl, "and you'll regret it." He twisted, harder, forcing Victor's arm back, the gold watch digging into his flesh, and for a heartbeat, Marcus dominated, his fury a wildfire that burned away the weight of the past hours. Victor's face contorted, pain and shock warring with his arrogance, and the cabin stirred, gasps rippling through the rows. The woman in the red blazer dropped her magazine, her mouth agape, while the balding man jerked upright, his tablet clattering to his tray. The silver-bearded man yanked out an earbud, his brows shooting up, and the teenage girl jolted awake, her phone tumbling to the floor with a thud. Marcus held Victor's wrist a second longer, his eyes blazing into the man's, letting him feel the power shift, the moment where the prey turned predator. Then he released him, shoving Victor's arm back with a flick, and sank into his seat, his chest heaving, the burns screaming but his spirit roaring. Victor clutched his wrist, his face flushed red, his breath ragged as he played it up, cradling. His arm like Marcus had broken it. "Help!" he shouted, his voice cracking with exaggerated panic, loud enough to echo down the aisle. "This guy's crazy! He attacked me!" The lie was instant, a masterstroke of manipulation. And Marcus saw it coming too late, the triumph in his gut souring as the cabin erupted. Kelly burst from the galley, her heels pounding the carpet, followed by the wiry attendant with the buzz. Cut, their faces a mix of alarm and suspicion. The woman in the red blazer pointed at Marcus, her voice shrill. "He grabbed him. I saw it." The balding man nodded, chiming in. "Out of nowhere, totally unprovoked," the silver-bearded man muttered. "Told you he was trouble," his tone smug, while the teenage girl fumbled for her phone, filming now, her eyes wide with glee. Marcus raised his hands, his voice steady but urgent. He shoved the tray into me first. I was defending myself. But the crew didn't listen. Their eyes locked on Victor, who winced dramatically, his wrist cradled like a wounded bird, his crocodile tears glistening under the lights. Kelly hesitated, her gaze flicking to Marcus, but the wiry attendant stepped forward, his voice hard. "Sir, you need to calm down, now." He reached into his vest, pulling out a pair of zip ties, the plastic glinting as he held them up, a silent threat. Marcus's stomach dropped, his pulse racing as the reality hit, Victor's trap snapping shut around him. "You're kidding me," he said, his voice rising, but Kelly cut him off, her tone sharp. "Sit back, Mr. Tate. We're handling this." The wiry attendant grabbed Marcus's arms, forcing them behind the seat, and snapped the zip ties tight, the plastic biting into his wrists with a harsh click. Marcus grunted, pain shooting up his arms, but he didn't fight, knowing it'd only dig the hole deeper. Victor leaned back, his grin returning, sly and triumphant, as the crew stepped away, leaving Marcus restrained, his burns throbbing, his wrists aching. His brief victory flipped into a nightmare. The woman in the red blazer whispered to her, "Seatmate, should have known," her voice dripping with judgment while the balding man shook his head muttering, "Unbelievable." The teenage girl's phone stayed trained on Marcus, the red light blinking, capturing every second of his downfall. The retirees stirred, blinking awake, and the silver-bearded man leaned over, whispering to them, his words lost, but his smirk clear. Marcus sat there, zip-tied and seething, the cabin's glares a wall he couldn't break, Victor's manipulation a noose tightening around him. The plane sailed on, the night outside cold and unforgiving, the stars mocking Marcus with their distance. His fight back had felt good, a blaze of defiance that burned bright, but Victor had turned it against him, painting him as the aggressor with a flick of his wrist and a fake cry. The crew hovered near the galley, their eyes darting back, suspicion, now hardened into certainty, and Marcus knew this was his lowest point yet. A man bound and branded at 35,000 feet. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, his wrist unmarked despite his act, and shot Marcus a look, his eyes gleaming with a promise of more. The defiance had cost Marcus dearly, and the war was far from over. "Hey viewers, what's your call?" Comment. Number 1, if you think Marcus was right to fight back, or number 2 if you reckon he just played into Victor's hands. Drop a like if you're raging at how fast this flipped, and hit subscribe to see if Marcus can claw his way out of this mess. Marcus struck hard, but Victor's spinning it like a pro. What happens when the guy you've pushed too far gets tied down instead of you? Can Marcus turn this trap into a comeback, or is Victor's next move gonna bury him for good? Stick around, because this flight's about to hit some serious turbulence. The first-class cabin trembled faintly at 35,000 feet. The night sky outside Marcus Tate's window a pitch-black void, the stars swallowed by clouds as the plane hurtled toward Miami. Marcus sat zip-tied to his seat, the plastic cuffs biting into his wrists, a sharp ache that pulsed with every beat of his heart. His jeans, still damp with coffee, clung to his thighs, the burns beneath screaming with every shift, a relentless sting that matched the fury boiling inside him. Victor Langston's latest triumph loomed beside him, the businessman's smug grin a permanent fixture as he lounged in the aisle seat, his polished shoe tapping a slow, victorious rhythm against the carpet. Marcus's fight back, that brief blaze of defiance when he'd twisted Victor's wrist, had flipped into a nightmare, the cabin's gasps and the crew's zip ties turning his strength into chains. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, his wrist unmarked, despite his theatrics, and let out a low chuckle, a sound that slithered through the tension like oil on water. He'd played the victim perfectly, yelping and cradling his arm until the crew pounced, and now Marcus was the monster, bound and helpless under a dozen accusing stares. The woman in the red blazer sat stiffly, her magazine forgotten, her eyes darting to Marcus with a mix of fear and disdain, her purse clutched like a shield. The balding man in the golf shirt leaned back, his tablet dark, whispering to the silver-bearded man across the aisle, who nodded with a smirk, his earbuds dangling unused. The teenage girl 3 rows back kept her phone up, the red light blinking. As she filmed, her lips pursed in a gleeful smirk while the retirees up front stirred awake, blinking at the commotion with bleary confusion. Kelly, the flight attendant, hovered near the galley, her blonde bun tight, her face a mask of unease as she conferred with the wiry attendant, his buzz cut gleaming under the lights. Their heads bent together, their voices a low buzz, and then the wiry man stepped forward, his hand resting on a walkie-talkie clipped to his vest. He raised it to his mouth, his eyes locked on Marcus, and spoke in a clipped tone that carried over the engines. "This is Flight 372 to Miami Tower. We've got an unruly passenger in first class, requesting police on landing. Over." Marcus's stomach lurched, a cold sweat prickling his skin as the words sank in, a death knell ringing in his ears. Police. Arrest. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was a cage closing around him, and Victor had the key. Victor leaned closer, his breath hot against Marcus's ear, his voice a whisper meant to wound. "Assaulted me out of nowhere," he said, loud enough for the balding man to hear, who nodded eagerly, soaking up the lie. "Threatened my life, too. You heard him say I'd regret it." He sat back, crossing his arms, his gold watch glinting like a taunt. And Marcus's blood ran hot, his wrists straining against the zip ties, the plastic cutting deeper as he fought the urge to lunge. "That's not what happened," Marcus said, his voice sharp, rising over the cabin's hum. "He shoved the tray into me first. I was defending myself. But the crew didn't flinch, their eyes cold, their minds made up, and the passengers chimed in, a chorus of Victor's puppets." The woman in the red blazer pointed a trembling finger, her voice shrill. "I saw him grab his arm, totally unprovoked." The balding man nodded, his tone grave. "He's been trouble since takeoff. Should have kicked him off." The silver-bearded man muttered, "Typical behavior." His words a dagger that twisted in Marcus's gut, while the teenage girl zoomed, her camera capturing every word, every glare. The retirees craned their necks, the woman whispering to her husband, "What's going on?" And he shrugged. "Some guy causing a scene." Marcus shook his head, his voice rising, desperate now. "You're lying. You didn't see it start. He's the one who attacked me." But his protest crashed against a wall of disbelief, the cabin's judgment a tide he couldn't stem. The wiry attendant stepped closer, his walkie-talkie crackling with static, his face hard as stone. "Sir, stop talking," he snapped, his hand hovering over the zip ties like he might tighten them more. "You're making this worse." Kelly lingered behind him, her eyes flickering with doubt. But she didn't speak, her silence a betrayal that cut deeper than the cuffs. Victor leaned back, his grin splitting wide, his hands laced behind his head as he savored the chaos. "Good call," he said, nodding to the attendant, his voice smooth, commanding. "Can't have him threatening anyone else." The balding man murmured agreement. "Absolutely." And the woman in the red blazer clutched her purse tighter, her eyes wide with fabricated fear. Marcus's chest heaved, his breath shallow, the zip ties a vice that pinned his arms, his burns, a fire that wouldn't fade. He twisted his head, meeting Victor's stare, and saw the glee there, the predator's thrill of a hunt won. "You're sick," Marcus said, his voice low, a growl that carried a promise, but Victor just chuckled, unfazed, his eyes gleaming with control. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again, calm and detached. "Folks, we're about 90 minutes from Miami. Stay seated, belts on. Any more disturbances and we'll divert to the nearest airport." The threat hung heavy, a hammer poised to fall, and Marcus froze, his protests dying in his throat. Divert the flight? Land? Somewhere else with cops waiting? He couldn't risk it, not with his wrists bound and Victor spinning lies like silk. The wiry attendant stepped back, his walkie-talkie back on his vest, his eyes lingering on Marcus with a squint that promised trouble. Kelly followed, her heels clicking softly, her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to meet Marcus's plea. The passengers settled, their whispers fading into a tense quiet, but their glares stayed, a gallery of contempt that pinned Marcus tighter than the zip ties. The woman in the red blazer muttered, "Should have known." Her voice a hiss, while the balding man shook his head, his tablet lighting up again as he retreated into his game. The silver-bearded man popped an earbud back in, dismissing Marcus. With a huff, and the teenage girl kept filming, her phone a silent witness to his fall. The retirees drifted back to sleep, their snores a soft counterpoint to the engine's hum, oblivious to the war raging in row 2. Victor stretched his legs, his shoe brushing Marcus's space again, a deliberate encroachment, and leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant to Barry. "You're done, buddy," he said, his tone light, lethal. "Cops'll love a guy like you." Marcus's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding as the words sank in. A vision of handcuffs, jail cells, a life unraveled, flashing before him. He'd fought back, stood up, and now he was facing arrest, his defiance twisted into a noose by Victor's hands. The burns throbbed, the zip ties cut, and the cabin's hostility pressed down, a weight he couldn't lift. He stared at the table, its edge still wet with coffee, and felt the desperation claw at him. A man trapped with no way out. The flight a countdown to a fate he didn't deserve. The plane jolted slightly, a faint turbulence rattling the overhead bins, and Marcus gripped the seat with his bound hands, his knuckles aching, his mind racing for a lifeline that wasn't there. Victor sat there, untouchable, his grin a beacon of triumph, and Marcus knew this was his lowest point, a pit dug by a man who'd never stopped pushing. The night stretched on outside, the clouds a shroud hiding any hope, and Marcus braced himself, the reality of landing in Miami with police waiting a shadow he couldn't outrun. Victor had won this round, and the cost was everything Marcus had left, his freedom hanging by a thread as the plane sailed on, a prison in the sky. The first-class cabin hummed through the night at 35,000 feet, the plane slicing toward Miami with a relentless drone, the darkness outside Marcus Tate's window, a thick curtain pierced only by the faint glow of the wing lights. His wrists ached, the zip ties cutting into his skin, a sharp sting that matched the burns throbbing beneath his coffee-soaked jeans. Bound to his seat, Marcus sat rigid, his chest tight, the weight of Victor Langston's lies, a noose tightening. With every passing minute, the wiry attendant's call for police on landing echoed in his skull, a ticking clock to a fate he couldn't escape, and Victor lounged beside him, his smug grin a beacon of triumph, his gold watch glinting like a taunt under the cabin lights. Marcus stared at the table, its edge still damp, his mind a storm of desperation, searching for a way out of this pit. Victor leaned back, his arms crossed, his polished shoe brushing Marcus's space, a silent claim on his victory. The cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet. The passengers' glares softened by fatigue, but their judgment lingered, a stain Marcus couldn't scrub off. The woman in the red blazer dozed, her magazine splayed across her lap, her purse still, clutched tight while the balding man in the golf shirt tapped his tablet. His game a faint beep in the silence. The silver-bearded man snored softly, his earbuds dangling, and the teenage girl 3 rows back slumped against her seat. Her phone dark, the thrill of filming lost to the late hour. The retirees up front slept, their snores a low rumble, oblivious to the war in row 2. Kelly and the wiry attendant hovered near the galley, their whispers a buzz of protocol, their eyes darting back to Marcus with a suspicion that felt like chains. But not everyone was asleep. Carla, a quiet Latina woman in her 30s seated in 4C, had stayed silent through the chaos, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her hands folded over a worn paperback. She'd watched it all, the coffee spill, the tray shove, Victor's taunts, Marcus's fight back, and the zip ties snapping shut. Her seat faced the aisle, giving her a clear view of row 2, and she'd seen more than the others, her sharp eyes catching the glint of Victor's smirk, the way he'd played the cabin like a fiddle. During the turbulence, when Victor had shoved Marcus's tray, Carla had slipped her phone from her pocket, her movements subtle, and hit record, the lens angled through the gap between seats. The video captured it all, the spill, the shove, Victor's whispered slur, "Stay in your lane, boy," clear as day on the audio. Now with the cabin quiet, Carla acted. She pulled her phone closer, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped the screen, uploading the clip to X with a quick caption, "Racism at 35,000 feet. This man's a liar." She tagged news outlets, her thumbs flying as she sent it to local Miami stations, national networks, anyone who'd listen. The plane's Wi-Fi was spotty, but the upload bar crept forward, and within minutes, The clip hit the internet, a spark igniting a wildfire. Carla leaned back, her breath shallow, her eyes flicking to Marcus, then Victor, knowing she'd just thrown a grenade into this mess. On the ground, the video spread, retweets piling up, views soaring into the millions, the hashtag #DarFlightInjustice trending. As viewers raged at Victor's cruelty, Marcus's plight a rallying cry. Back in the cabin, the shift came fast. Kelly's phone buzzed in her vest, a sharp vibration that jolted her from her huddle with the wiry attendant. She pulled it out, her brows furrowing as she scrolled, her face paling as the video loaded. Victor's voice crackling through her earbuds. "Stay in your lane, boy," followed by the tray shove, Marcus's gasp of pain. The wiry attendant leaned over, his jaw dropping as he watched, the truth unspooling in grainy clarity. They exchanged a look, panic flickering in their eyes, and Kelly darted to the galley, her heels clicking frantically as she grabbed the intercom to call the captain. The passengers stirred, sensing the ripple, the woman in the red blazer blinking awake, the balding man pausing his game, their heads turning toward the commotion. The captain's phone rang in the cockpit, a call from airline HQ cutting through the static of the flight controls. "We've got a problem," the voice crackled, urgent, sharp. "Your unruly passenger isn't just some guy. Marcus, Tate's a silent partner in Tate Aeronautics, our biggest supplier, multi-millionaire. That video's everywhere, and the other guy's toast. Untie him now." The captain froze, his hand hovering over the controls, then barked an order to the co-pilot, who relayed it to the cabin crew. Kelly burst from the galley, her face flushed, the wiry attendant trailing her, his walkie-talkie forgotten as they rushed to row 2. Victor glanced up, his grin faltering as he caught their urgency, a crack in his armor widening fast. Kelly stopped short, her voice shaky but firm. "Mr. Tate, we're so sorry. There's been a mistake." She knelt, fumbling with a pair of scissors from her vest, and snipped the zip ties, the plastic falling away with a soft thud. Marcus flexed his wrists, the blood rushing back with a sharp sting, his eyes narrowing as he rubbed the red marks, confusion warring with relief. The wiry attendant stammered, "We didn't know, sir. We're fixing this." Victor's head snapped around, his face draining of color, his smirk vanishing as he stared at Marcus, then Kelly, his mind racing to catch up. "What the hell's going on?" he demanded, his voice rising. But Kelly ignored him, her focus on Marcus, her tone reverent now. "Anything you need, just ask. We're so sorry." The passengers murmured, the woman in the red blazer blinking in shock, the balding man dropping his tablet with a clatter, his mouth agape. The silver-bearded man yanked out an earbud, his smirk gone, while the teenage girl's phone lit up, her fingers flying as she scrolled X, gasping at the viral clip. The retirees craned their necks, whispering, "What's happening?" As the cabin buzzed with a new tension, the tide turning fast, Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket, a flood of notifications, hate messages, calls from panicked assistants, his real estate empire crumbling under the weight of public fury. He pulled it out, his hands trembling, his face ashen as he scrolled, the hashtag #FlightInjustice staring back at him, his own voice damning him in the video. Marcus sat up straighter, his burns still throbbing, his wrists raw, but a flicker of power surged through him as he watched Victor unravel. The crew's apologies washed over him, their deference a stark shift from the suspicion that had bound him minutes ago. He glanced at Carla, catching her eye across the aisle, and saw her nod. A quiet strength in her gaze, a silent, "I did this." He nodded back, gratitude swelling in his chest, a lifeline he hadn't seen coming. Victor slumped in his seat, his phone slipping to his lap, his world collapsing as the cabin's glares turned on him, a mirror of the hate he'd sown. Marcus wasn't just free, he was a titan revealed, and Victor's reign was over, or so it seemed. The plane sailed on. The night outside a canvas of shifting clouds, the stars peeking through like witnesses to the twist. Marcus flexed his hands, the sting of the zip ties fading, his mind racing with the truth of his power, a secret he'd kept quiet until now. Victor stared at his phone, his breath shallow, his empire cracking under the viral storm. And Marcus knew this wasn't the end. The man beside him wasn't done fighting, not yet. and the flight still had 90 minutes to go. A battlefield reshaped by a single video, a single truth. The first-class cabin vibrated with a tense hum at 35,000 feet, the plane slicing through the night sky toward Miami, the horizon outside Marcus Tate's window hinting at a faint glow as dawn crept closer. Marcus sat upright, his wrists raw from the zip ties that had just been cut. The burns beneath his coffee-soaked jeans a dull ache now overshadowed by a surge of power pulsing through him. Carla's viral video had flipped the script, exposing Victor Langston's racism and lies to millions. And the revelation of Marcus's true identity, a multi-millionaire silent partner in Tate Aeronautics, had turned the crew into stammering apologists. Victor slumped beside him, his face ashen, his phone buzzing incessantly with the fallout of his crumbling empire, his gold watch dull under the cabin lights. Marcus flexed his hands, the sting fading, and felt the tide shift, a titan rising, from the ashes of the past hours. The cabin buzzed with a new energy, the passengers' glares now fixed on Victor, their whispers a chorus of shock and disdain. The woman in the red blazer stared at Marcus, her magazine limp in her lap, her purse forgotten as she murmured to the balding man in the golf shirt, who nodded, his tablet dark, his face flushed with embarrassment. The silver-bearded man yanked out his earbuds, his smirk replaced by a scowl aimed at Victor, while the teenage girl 3 rows back scrolled X furiously, her gasps punctuating the silence as the hashtag Chiker Flight Injustice soared. The retirees up front craned their necks, the woman whispering, "He's a millionaire?" and her husband nodding, "Serves that jerk right." Kelly and the wiry attendant hovered near the galley, their eyes darting between Marcus and Victor, their deference to Marcus a stark reversal, their hands empty of zip ties now. Victor's phone buzzed again, a shrill vibration that jolted him from his stupor, and he snatched it up, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the hate, the sponsor cancellations, the headlines screaming his name. His real estate empire was imploding, deals evaporating under the viral storm, and his breath came shallow, panic clawing at his chest. He glanced at Marcus, his sharp blue eyes narrowing, rage boiling beneath the fear. This wasn't over. He'd lost the cabin, lost the narrative, but he wasn't going down without a fight. His hand slipped into his pocket, pulling out a slim pen, and he gripped it like a lifeline, his mind racing for a final play. Marcus had humiliated him, turned his game into a public execution, and Victor's pride demanded blood, no matter the cost. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but firm. "Folks, we're beginning our descent into Miami. 30 minutes to landing. Stay seated, belts on." The plane tilted slightly, the engine shifting pitch, and the cabin stirred, passengers buckling up, the overhead bins rattling faintly. Victor seized the moment, his rage erupting as he lunged at Marcus, his voice a raw scream that shattered the quiet. "You think you've won, you bastard?" he roared, slurs spilling from his lips, a torrent of hate that stunned the cabin into silence. His fist swung, the pen clutched like a shank aiming for Marcus's chest, a wild, desperate strike fueled by a man with nothing left to lose. Marcus reacted fast, his reflexes honed from years in rough garages, and twisted in his seat, dodging the blow as the pen grazed his shoulder, tearing a thin slash through his leather jacket. He grabbed Victor's arm, slamming it down against the armrest, the pen clattering to the carpet with a dull thud. Victor thrashed, his free hand clawing at Marcus's face, but Marcus pinned him back, his strength surging as he pressed Victor into the seat, his burns forgotten, his fury a fire that matched Victor's own. The cabin erupted, passengers shouting, the woman in the red blazer shrieking, "Stop him!" while the balding man stood yelling, "He's crazy!" The silver-bearded man gaped, his phone tumbling to the floor, and the teenage girl filmed, her hands shaking, capturing every second of the chaos. Kelly bolted from the galley, her heels pounding, the wiry attendant close behind, their voices overlapping in a frantic yell. "Sir, stop! Sit down!" But Victor didn't hear, his eyes wild, his screams a garbled mix of slurs and threats as Marcus held him down, his chest heaving, his grip iron tight. The retirees clutched each other, the woman gasping, "Oh my God," while the husband shouted, "Get security!" The plane rocked, the descent steepening, and the overhead lights flickered, amplifying the madness. Marcus shoved Victor back harder, his voice a low growl. "You're done," he said, his eyes blazing into Victor's, a promise carved in stone. The passengers cheered, a ragged chorus of support, their phones up, filming the takedown, a tide turning against the man who'd ruled the flight. But Victor wasn't finished. As Marcus eased his grip, thinking the fight was over, Victor's hand darted to his phone, his fingers flying across the screen in a blur. He fired off a text to a corrupt Miami cop he'd golfed with last month, a guy deep in his pocket. "Black guy in first class, drugs in his bag, arrest him on landing." Then, with a final burst of spite, he reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a small baggie of cocaine, and flung it into Marcus's duffel under the seat ahead, his movements quick, hidden by the chaos. He slumped back, his breath ragged, his grin returning, sly and vicious as Marcus released him, unaware of the trap snapping shut. The crew reached them, Kelly grabbing Victor's shoulder, the wiry attendant pulling him back, their voices sharp. "Enough! Sit still!" Victor complied, his hands up, his face a mask of exhaustion, but his eyes gleamed, a predator biding his time. Marcus sank into his seat, his shoulders stinging from the pen's slash, his hands trembling with adrenaline. The cheers fading into a tense murmur as the passengers watched, phones still rolling. The woman in the red blazer clapped softly, whispering, "Good for you," to Marcus, while the balding man nodded. "About time." The silver-bearded man muttered, "Serves him right." And the teenage girl's video streamed live, the comments flooding with support for Marcus, outrage at Victor. The plane steadied, the descent smoothing out, the Miami skyline glinting faintly through the clouds outside, a promise of land growing closer. Kelly handed Marcus a damp towel for his shoulder, her voice soft. "We've got this, Mr. Tate. He won't touch you again." The wiry attendant stood guard, his eyes on Victor, who sat silent now, his phone dark, his grin a secret weapon. Marcus wiped the blood from his jacket, his mind racing, the fight of victory that felt hollow, a nagging unease tugging at him. He didn't see the baggie, didn't know Victor's final play, but he felt the shift, the way Victor's silence carried a weight darker than his screams. The descent continued, the engines whining as the plane dropped lower, the cabin lights brightening for landing. Marcus glanced at Victor, catching the flicker of triumph in his eyes, and his gut twisted, a warning he couldn't name. The passengers buckled up, their chatter fading, the woman in the red blazer offering Marcus a small smile, the balding man nodding in solidarity. The teenage girl kept filming, her phone a lifeline to the world below, and the retirees whispered, "What a flight," their voices a mix of awe and relief. But Victor's grin grew, his hands steady now, and Marcus braced himself, the victory slipping as the plane touched down, the wheels screeching against the tarmac at Miami International. Cops swarmed the gate, their boots pounding as the plane rolled to a stop, and Marcus's heart sank. The cheers turning to gasps as officers stormed aboard, their eyes locked on him. "Marcus Tate?" one barked, his hand on his holster, and Marcus froze, confusion crashing over him. The wiry attendant stepped back, stammering, "Wait, no, it's him," pointing at Victor, but the cop ignored him, yanking Marcus's duffel from under the seat. He unzipped it, pulling out the baggie of cocaine, holding it up with a sneer. "You're under arrest," he said, and Marcus's world tilted, Victor's grin splitting wide, a final vicious blow that landed as the cuffs snapped shut, the cabin erupting in chaos once more. The first-class cabin sat still at Miami International Airport, the plane's engines winding down with a low whine, the dawn light seeping through Marcus Tate's window in streaks of pink and gold. Handcuffs bit into his wrists, colder and tighter than the zip ties had been as two Miami cops loomed over him, their faces hard, their boots scuffing the carpet. The baggie of cocaine dangled from one officer's gloved hand, pulled from Marcus's duffel moments after landing, a damning prop in Victor Langston's final vicious play. Marcus sat frozen, his coffee-soaked jeans stiff against his burns, his shoulder stinging from Victor's pen slash, his mind reeling as the cabin erupted in chaos. Victor leaned back in the aisle seat, his grin a jagged slash of triumph, his gold watch glinting under the brightening lights, his empire bruised but his spite unbroken. The passengers gasped, their cheers for Marcus turning to murmurs of shock, the tide flipping once more in a flight that refused to end quietly. The Woman in the red blazer clutched her purse, her voice trembling as she whispered to the balding man in the golf shirt. Drugs, after all that? The balding man shook his head, his tablet forgotten, muttering, Unbelievable. The silver-bearded man across the aisle blinked awake, his earbuds dangling, his scowl deepening as he stared at Marcus, while the teenage girl 3 rows back fumbled her phone, filming again, her gasps punctuating the tension. The retirees up front craned their necks, the woman clutching her husband's arm. What now? And him replying, Never ends, does it? Kelly and the wiry attendant stood frozen near the galley, their faces pale, their earlier apologies to Marcus hollow as the cops took charge. Victor's text to his corrupt cop buddy had landed perfectly, the cocaine a masterstroke that buried Marcus just as he'd risen, and the cabin watched, breathless, as the trap snapped shut. But Carla wasn't done. The quiet Latina woman in 4C, whose viral video had first exposed Victor, sat rigid, her dark eyes blazing as the cops yanked Marcus to his feet. She'd recorded more than the coffee spill and tray shove, her phone rolling through Victor's lunge with the pen, his slurs, and, crucially, the moment he'd flung the baggie into Marcus's duffel during the descent's chaos. Her fingers flew across her screen, uploading the full clip to X with a new caption, He planted it. This man's innocent. The video hit the platform as the cops dragged Marcus toward the jet bridge, the upload bar racing, and within seconds, it exploded. Millions more views piling onto the first, the hashtag, Meaner Flight Injustice roaring back to life. News vans screeched into the airport lot below, reporters scrambling as the story reignited, a fire Victor couldn't outrun. At the precinct, 10 minutes from the gate, Marcus sat in a stark holding room, the cuffs chafing his wrists, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, his breath steady despite the storm in his chest. The cops had shoved him into a chair, the baggie on the table, their sneers a wall he couldn't breach. But the door burst open, a whirlwind of tailored suits and clipped heels storming in, led by Lena Carter, Marcus's lawyer, a powerhouse, in her 40s with a reputation for shredding corrupt systems. Her braids swung as she strode forward, her eyes sharp, her voice a blade. Release him. Now, she snapped, slamming a tablet onto the table, Carla's full video playing on loop, Victor's drug planting clear as daylight. The cops froze, their faces paling, the lead officer stammering, We got a tip. But Lena cut him off. From a liar. Check your phones. He's finished. The precinct buzzed, officers scrambling as the video hit their screens, the chief storming in, his face red with fury as he barked orders. Get Langston in here, he roared, and the corrupt cop, Victor's golf buddy, shrank in the corner, his badge suddenly heavy. Lena turned to Marcus, her voice softening. You're not just free, you're untouchable. She pulled out documents, proof of Marcus's stake in Tate Aeronautics, a 50% owner of the airline they'd flown, a detail that made the cops' jaws drop. The chief snatched the papers, his eyes widening, and waved a hand. Uncuff. Him. Now. The cuffs fell away, clattering to the floor, and Marcus stood, rubbing his wrists, his burns a dull ache, his pride a fire reigniting as the room shifted around him. Back at the gate, Victor strutted off the plane, his grin faltering, as 4 cops swarmed him, their hands rough as they pinned his arms, his phone tumbling to the carpet with a thud. Victor Langston, you're under arrest for assault, theft, and evidence tampering, one barked, snapping cuffs on his wrists, the click a sound sweeter to Marcus than any applause. Victor thrashed, his voice a raw scream. You can't do this. I own this airline. But the lead cop smirked. Not anymore. And shoved him toward the jet bridge, the passengers watching, their phones up, filming his fall. The woman in the red blazer clapped, her purse forgotten, while the balding man whistled. Karma's fast. The silver-bearded man muttered, Good riddance. And the teenage girl streamed live, her followers cheering as Victor's empire crumbled in real time. Marcus strode out of the precinct, Lena at his side, the Miami sun blazing overhead, the air thick with salt and freedom. Reporters mobbed him, mics thrusting forward, but he waved them off, his voice steady as he spoke. To one camera, This isn't just about me. It's about a system that lets guys like him thrive. I'm tearing it down, starting today. He'd use his wealth, his stake in Tate Aeronautics, to root out the bias that had nearly buried him, a vow carved in the steel of his resolve. The cops hauled Victor into a squad car, his screams muffled as the door slammed, his sponsors ditching him, his deals dissolving, his name a stain no money could wash away. Marcus watched from a distance, his leather jacket torn but his spirit unbroken, a titan reborn from a flight that had tried to break him. The precinct buzzed behind him, the corrupt cop stripped of his badge, the chief issuing apologies on live TV, Carla's videos a hammer that shattered Victor's world. She stepped off the plane, her paperback tucked under her arm, and caught Marcus's eye across the tarmac, offering a small nod, a quiet hero who'd turned the tide. Marcus nodded back, gratitude swelling in his chest, a bond forged in the sky now sealed on the ground. The passengers dispersed, the woman in the red blazer shaking her head, never flying again, while the balding man muttered, "What a story." The teenage girl's livestream hit 10 million views, her voice a whisper. Justice won, as the retirees shuffled off, still dazed. Wildest trip ever. Kelly and the wiry attendant stood at the gate, their faces sheepish, their apologies lost to the wind as Marcus walked away. Victor sat in a cell, his suit rumpled, his watch confiscated, his screams echoing down the hall as the door clanged shut. A king dethroned by his own hand. Marcus stepped into the sunlight, Lena at his side, the Miami skyline sprawling before him, a new battlefield where he'd wield his power to dismantle the systems that had propped Victor up. The flight was over, but the war wasn't, and Marcus knew this was just the start. He glanced back at the airport, the plane a speck against the dawn, and felt the weight lift, a vow taking its place, a promise to fight for every soul crushed by men like Victor. The screen faded, a question lingering. In the air, who's next? This electrifying tale of Marcus Tate and Victor Langston aboard a flight from Chicago to Miami unpacks raw lessons about power, prejudice, and perseverance. First, appearances deceive. Victor judged Marcus by his worn jacket, blind to the titan beneath. Proving snap judgments often backfire when the truth surfaces. Marcus's journey shows that wealth and status don't shield you from systemic bias. His millions couldn't stop Victor's lies or the crew's quick distrust. A stark reminder that racism thrives in silence and complicity. Yet, resilience shines brightest in the dark. Marcus endured insults, burns, and cuffs, fighting back with grit and intellect, teaching us that standing tall against injustice, even when cornered, can spark change. Carla's quiet courage with her phone flipped the narrative, proving one voice can topple a giant, a call to action for us all to speak up when we witness wrong. Victor's downfall, his empire crumbling under public fury, reveals that unchecked, arrogance and hate carry a heavy price, a lesson in accountability that echoes beyond the cabin. Finally, Marcus's vow to dismantle bias with his power underscores that true victory isn't just surviving, it's rewriting the rules so others don't suffer the same. This story isn't just a flight, it's a mirror, reflecting our flaws and our potential to rise above them. So what's your takeaway? How would you fight back if you were Marcus, or would you be the Carla in the shadows turning the tide? Drop a comment with number 1 if you'd stand up like Marcus, or number 2 if you'd expose the truth like Carla. Hit like if this fired you up, and subscribe for more tales of grit and justice. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and thanks for flying with us through this wild ride. Here's to a world where truth wins every time.